So, what happens when the sun goes down? Everything glows. Except for you over there with the rainy weather. Sorry about that. Hello minders, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Well, I think I have a fun one for you today, and I've been asked many times, what do I do to make something glow or emanate light or appear to be luminescent in watercolor? And I think the way I chose to answer that is with a sunset. And I've been asked many times to do a sunset painting, but I did want to do one. I did want to do one for a study. I like playing around with clouds. I love that. So I wanted to do a sunset that had all the kind of streaky, wispy clouds going in front. And that's what I did. And this is a good opportunity to show you how to make something glow, in this case a sunset. And it's really very simple, and I'm going to demonstrate it, but I can tell you just in one statement, the way to do that is to lower the value of everything else. Simple, right? Well, let's get into it. We'll talk about how to do that. Reese, where are you at, buddy? Time to summon Reese so he can say hello. He's not getting off that easy. There you go. Say hello to everybody. What you been doing? You heard me talking about sunsets and you wanted to be prepared. Prepared for what? You don't have to be afraid of the dark. After dark, you're probably the scariest thing out there. Alright, minders. Well, what I started off with was a thumbnail. And this is just a little value study. I was just trying to familiarize myself with where the hottest highlight would be. And that, of course, is the sun. And then how the values rank after that. And literally everything is darker. And that's sort of what I'm trying to show you here today. The clouds are not quite as dark as the foreground, but everything is darker. And that serves to make that sun pop and really glow. And this is the paper I'm using today, Winsor Newton Pro, the new Winsor Newton Pro. This is just a 140 pound cold press block. Just an amazing paper. I'm really impressed with this paper. So I'm going to use this Sterling Edwards. It's actually a blending and glazing brush, but it's a great way to wet your paper. And I'm going to use it to completely wet the paper. And I do this 2 or 3 times. I like the stiffness when I'm wetting paper. It just kind of pushes that water down into the paper. At least that's what it feels like. The first coat usually gets soaked up pretty quick, and then I do a couple more after that just to get a nice even saturation. Now in retrospect, I really should have painted this flat. I'm on about a 45-degree angle. For you that try it out there, do this flat. You're going to have a lot less problems. And you can see I'm painting that area in the center. That's going to be the hot color for the sun. And all this dries lighter. The typical watercolor drying shift that you get. And I'm just trying to create that round aura that the sun has, and then everything kind of graduates. I could have used a round here too. I'm using a really large silver black velvet flat. It doesn't matter a whole lot because I end up, brushing and blending, and the wetness disperses it pretty well. But you can see how I'm continuing to fight all that running to the bottom. I don't know why I didn't paint this flat, but now you can see how everything is dissipating and becoming a lot less intense. Now, second mistake, and I didn't intend to make this video about mistakes, but the blue here, which is a sort of a cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, tiny bit of violet thrown in. I should have done this on a separate glaze. I don't know, again, why. I was trying to do all this wet and wet. And it made it a little harder to manage, I think, in retrospect. I guess I thought I'd get more blending, but I really needed to control that hot, bright area in the center. And I think if I'd have glazed this blue over instead of doing it while everything was wet, I might have had a little more control. In the end, I think it works out well. I've kind of have some experience and working through and pressing through these tough scenarios, but in the future I'm going to do that as a glaze. And you just saw me blotting out the center there to make the hottest part of the sky. We continue by adding some more blue, and I want that, of course, to graduate from a deeper blue at the top down to a sunset. So I'm just sort of setting the stage. And you will get buckling. I have people ask me a lot about buckling. You will get it on a block even. It's just part of the game. Unless I remove that paper from the block and stretched it, there's not much you can do about it. So I will go to glazes now, and everything dried, but I do want to re-wet the paper for the next glaze. So rather than use a brush, use a spray. Again, I'm contending with the dripping towards the bottom, but I'm starting to get that orange, red orange, yellow orange streakiness that I wanted, because this is going to be fairly cloudy sunset or cloud streaked sunset, and you'll see that. So I wanted this to be a fairly streaky look. This, this sky just like that could have actually made a decent backdrop for a sunset without even putting a lot of clouds. But since I'm wanting this to be a cloudscape, I'm using this as my backdrop, and we'll build on top of this. And I'll minimize the foreground in front. Dry it all out. You can see that color shift there, that drying shift, where everything dries lighter. I wanted to go ahead then and put in the foreground with the distant tree line. And here is where, the tutorial sort of illustrates what I'm talking about. This is how you make something glow. All the values around the hot spot or the greatest source of light needs to be darker, and the foreground is the darkest part. I mean, it's pretty much almost silhouette, and I actually could have even gone darker with it and just sprayed it to keep it soft. I am filling in some detail while it's wet, but I'll come back later. I just wanted to see what the values were doing to the painting, and I like to work these paintings as a whole when possible, so I get the overall effect. This foreground was pretty spontaneous. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, so I just started brushing in, and it was kind of cool. I left some spots open there. I hadn't intended to put like puddles or little ponds, but that's what it looked like, and so I left them. And I want to bring the value of those trees down even further. Here, some of the dripping and running towards the bottom kind of gave it a nice effect. I think in retrospect, I will do this flat or nearly flat next time. And while it's wet, as it starts to dry, paint, I've said it in other videos, paint starts to spread less, but it's still spreading. And the more the water dries, the more the wet surface dries, the less water you want in your brush, or you're likely to create problems. So I'm dabbing in mostly just pigment and letting the moisture take it and spread it. And then now you're starting to see the effect of the glow come out. Once you add that darker value, all of a sudden that sunset lights up just really beautifully. I probably should have waited for that detail. I couldn't help myself. I just wanted to add a few of the trees now to see how this was all looking. Part of that is I wanted to see how my scale looks. So I'll render a tree maybe and get the size of it. More spray just to keep it all wet. At this point, I don't want to re-wet the paper with a brush. And all of these clouds now are going to be darker than the sky behind it, because the sun and the light is behind them. You may see some color on the underlit side, but for the most part, they're going to be darker. And I am looking at some reference, not a particular scene, so I'm not copying a scene, but I have 2 or 3 pictures of clouds of various types, and contending with that rundown again. Ugh. But this is a great tip. If you end up with running or spreading that you don't want, a tissue is your savior. Just blot, and that stops the flow. And in the end, it kind of worked out pretty well, because I was getting the hard and soft, or what I like to call lost and found edges in some of those clouds. And I think that's just really pretty. And I didn't want the clouds all hard edged, and I didn't want them all completely soft and cottony. I wanted a mix of both. So the tissue kind of helps that. And as I add more water and pigment, I have to keep worrying about that flow working its way down. So now it's just a matter of dabbing and working the cloud shapes while all of the cloud shapes are still damp and wet. Again, dabbing to stop the flow, but also to make the clouds recede off into the distance at the bottom. That's why I'm blotting them. That turned out to be a very nice little effect. You can see where it's soft in places, hard in places. Painting clouds is just so much fun, to get that drama in there. Clouds will be dark in places and lighter in places because they have various thicknesses, but they do have volume. So you have to keep that in mind. You don't want cut out paper clouds. You want your clouds to have rounded form and volume. And I think you do that by, rolling those shapes over and under, some in shadow and some in light. And I'll come back to those clouds, but I don't think there's a whole lot more I want to do to them. I end up adding a little more, but now is the time to add some more detail to those trees, and at the same time I can darken that, bringing in my Sterling Edwards glazing and blending brush there just to blend out the bottom edge. Detail for detail's sake is not what I'm doing here. I mean, I love doing detail when it makes a painting really good, but the reason I like to add a detail in this kind of context is to establish scale. I like the eye being able to tell that this is a distant tree line, and these trees are all distant. So I need to keep the detail small and to scale. Now I'm going back with some red orange, and I'm glazing. This would be where light is coming into the clouds in the foreground, and also creating some thin veiled clouds behind those darker clouds. So just another great magic, inherent in glazing. A lot of artists, a lot of watercolorists paint clouds sort of alla prima. That just means all in one sitting or all at once. And that's fine. I've seen some beautiful skies done that way, but you know, I love just adding that extra dimension with a few glazes placed in just the right place. And so now, you know, I'm able to bring the color forward and weave it, so to speak, into those clouds. And just bringing up my Sterling Edwards glazing and blending brush to blend out the edges so they look like part of those clouds. I have done little demos on this blending technique in a couple other videos. I'll try to remember to put the links to that below. Basically, that's just a bristle brush, and you keep it damp, not wet, damp, and blot it out. And when you put it on there, it just sort of adds a tiny bit of moisture to the surface of the paper and causes that color to blend into it. I wanted to bring a darker layer of clouds over on the right here just to balance it out and to come way forward, like sort of way in the foreground. And the further in the foreground you get, the further the sun is back behind it, so they will be pretty much silhouetted type clouds. They were getting a little hard-edged, so softening them. And you know, you can paint these clouds any way you want. They can be bigger, broader, rounder shapes, but I like these sort of flatter, streaky, striated sort of configurations. I think it looks neat. And I think pretty much I'm done. I end up coming back and doing some more detail in those distant trees. You can see also where I ended up with run under the tape down in the corners. I added those hills later. It was a decision I made later, and I did more glazing up in there to add some color in through those holes. There's the tree detail I added, some little spiky bare trees and just a little more detail. But overall, I think that's done. Hope y'all enjoyed this. Thank you, patrons, for sponsoring this channel, and thank you everyone else for watching too. And we will see everyone next time in the next video.